But I should say, with COVID-19, obviously it's disrupted every single aspect of society and how we like to be together. Whatever we do, it's changed the world forever. To get some perspectives on this and the ways in which the world have changed, it would be good to come in the first instance to a scientist, a microbiologist. Ian, could you introduce yourself, and then we'll go around to the rest of the panel. Ian, could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit of your perspective on this COVID-19 moment?
Hi everyone, so yeah, I'm Ian Goodhead. I'm a researcher at the University of Salford, a researcher into infectious diseases, particularly genetics around them. But I'm also Associate Dean for Research for Science, Engineering and Environment, so I manage all of the science research that goes on there. My interest here is also as a person who likes to disseminate the outputs of our research. I'm particularly interested in microbial communities, and myself with a colleague, Dr. Chloe James, have developed a VR experience around using a Minecraft-like simulation to look at microbial communities in the lung, and we were just getting going with that at Blue Dot Festival and some other places when, of course, COVID hit, and we were thinking about how we were going to develop those VR experiences moving forwards. And so we're also in the same boat, thinking about how we're going to engage audiences using these sorts of technologies moving forward. So I have a personal sort of buy-in into this subject as well.
You mentioned microbial. For anyone who doesn't know, what do you mean by that? What's microbial?
Sorry, yeah. So yeah. When I talk about microbes, I use the term quite generally to include bacteria, parasites, but also viruses as well. You know, all of those come together and are very involved in keeping us healthy. Of course, clearly that's not necessarily the topic at the minute with the current pandemic, when everyone seeing a virus and thinking it's causing obviously these massive problems, but actually there are some viruses that can be quite beneficial as well. But that's not really the topic for today. But certainly something that I'm interested in.
But that perhaps should be something that we do have a moment to focus on a little bit, because this is not unusual that we're surrounded by viruses and bacteria. Our human world, we're not the only species in the world.
Certainly not. No. Certainly, as an infectious disease biologist with a little bit of on the outskirts of epidemiology, certainly none of this comes as much of a surprise. This isn't the first outbreak we've had. And certainly won't be the last. And so, yeah, the topics that we're covering today should definitely, influence our thinking way into the future. Similarly, we shouldn't also retreat into an ongoing panic that we need to be worrying about sterilizing everything all the time. There's other contexts here, and you'll have heard a lot about early in the pandemic around not taking antibiotics in order to treat viruses, and that carries on being a big problem because that's about treating bacterial diseases, although that comes under microbes, and we need to be mindful that antimicrobial resistance and things. There are other challenges around treating infections that we need to have one eye on as well, because they do fundamentally have an important role in keeping us healthy and keeping our environment healthy.
So taking a kind of strategic approach, it sounds like. We're already getting questions around face masks. It might be a time to kind of remind ourselves. Currently, Ian, at the moment, there's no cure for COVID-19. There's no vaccine. Is there anything in the pipeline that we should or could know about that's on the horizon, or kind of any guidance initially, just so that we're all on the same place as to what the guidance is?
Cure-wise, there are now treatments coming online for treating severe COVID disease. You'll see in the press. I'm rubbish with names, but dexamethasone, I think, is a treatment that seems to be relieving the worst symptoms of of very severe COVID-19. The big problem about developing both cures and vaccines at the minute is actually there aren't enough patients coming through the system with severe disease in order to prove efficacy and safety of these treatments, which is actually a big problem. The other thing that's coming out from a cure perspective is hydroxyquinolone is nonsense. It's not very useful, despite what Donald Trump would say. So don't be taking that. Vaccine-wise, the UK is in a great position for because of its close links between the science and NHS, that we can rapidly proceed through the clinical trials for vaccine development. So we're in a great position, uniquely in the world, to be able to obviously link patients with clinical trials, which really helps speed things along. And I think there's something like 40 different vaccines in trial across the world. There's several in the UK, the most famous one being coming out of the Oxford group, which is now entering stage 3 trials. So that's pretty much the last part of it. And there's the government have made deals with the pharmaceutical industry to ramp up production of those vaccines ahead of its proof of efficacy, so that they would be ready should they prove it to be worthwhile. And so with a fair wind, they're predicting that maybe, and the signs are certainly good, certainly from the stage 1 trials, that the vaccine is working, but for a Christmas release, but likely Easter next year.
Christmas/Easter release of vaccine. So I should say, sounds like the scientist Ian's very excited about this, because it's this is an exciting thing. But let's hear from different perspectives from people that are working in the virtual reality and live events industry. So we kind of get back into that world of how it's affecting industry. So I'm going to come to you now, Catherine. Could you introduce yourself and your take on how this affected you and the work that you do?
Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Catherine Allen and I'm the CEO of a company called Immersive. We've been running virtual reality theatre events since the beginning of 2017. So from a public perspective, we look like, and we are, a place where you can come and experience creative, cultural, really interesting content in an out-of-home space, usually an arts venue, more recently a plush department store. You can, from a public perspective, that's what Limina is. We're basically a great thing to do on, say, an evening or an afternoon out with your friends, or your family, your loved ones. But then the other side of it is research, and using all this opportunity that we've had with now over 15,000 audience members to learn about audience demand. What is it that audiences want in terms of both content and form, so the format for which in location immersive media can be exhibited. And we've learned a lot there about, for instance, the duty of care that you have to your audience, and things like the need for decompression afterwards, to be recombobulated with the real world. And we've learned about the kind of content that audiences will pay for and what they won't. So it's something that's really as you can imagine, with COVID hitting, the nature of a business that we are, we have really, really been hit. I think just to what Mark was saying, I feel like this cultural creative side of the in-location VR sector was just reaching a point when things were really looking up. Things were, at Limina's perspective, we felt that we'd really cracked it, actually. We knew how to fill out one of our 21-person VR theatres, and we could do that on the hour, every hour, for days. We knew the kind of content, that people would pay tickets for and how much to charge. And we also we thought we had our hygiene process down as well. So we just reached that point where we had a partnership with Harvey Nichols, and we were running VR theatres with them, and we just got back from Australia as well, working with Electric Dreams, running the part of the VR cinema for Adelaide Fringe Festival. So we reached this lovely point where it felt like, we know our process, we know how to get audience members in, and it's really, really working. And then, pandemic hit, and the business model was no longer viable. And so I'm in this stage at the moment, as so many are, where we're working out what's possible, what essentially reinventing Limina as a company. If the main way that we had access to our research participants and also our audience members, our main revenue streams, have been so severely hit. So I'm really looking forward to sharing what we've learned. There's so much that's still relevant, and also sharing quite a bit of the analysis that I've done myself over the last few months in order to inform Limina's business plans for the next year or so.
Thank you. So you say you've been doing some research. I just wanted to wind you back a little bit to that bit. You talked about duty of care inside virtual reality experiences. Could you just tell us a bit more about that? I've obviously experienced some virtual reality, and I haven't enjoyed it that much, if I'm completely honest. So what do you mean? What have I missed in experiencing something that you might have put on?
Yeah, great question to ask about the duty of care, because it's one of the key deciding factors, I think, for audience members as to whether or not they're even going to partake in a VR theatre or a in-location VR event. It's if they feel they're going to be safe. And they don't necessarily, it's not really a conscious thing always. Often it just results in, we found in our focus groups, audience members saying, well, I just didn't think that that was for me, you know. I didn't think that that was the kind of thing somebody like me would do. Or, oh no, that's for my teenage son. So often it manifests itself in ways where people don't know why they're not feeling comfortable. But then when we say, okay, well, we have a person who guides you through who's really friendly and you can stop at any time, and the headsets have all been cleaned, and there's also a decompression zone where you can just come back to real life afterwards, and if you don't like it, then that's totally fine. All these different points in our duty of care plan, which ultimately can make the difference for people who don't consider themselves early adopters. Usually people who, you know, on the technology adoption curve, you consider sort of the early majority or the late majority. For that audience group, it really, really can make a difference. And some of it is quite basic. It's like, you know, do I feel that I have privacy? Do I have privacy? Are people going to be taking photos of me when I'm pulling silly faces? Am I able to let go? Or for instance, am I needing to be worried about my bag? Will that be safe? Can I bring kids with me? It's quite pragmatic. Zoom out, quite maybe basic questions with it. There's so many VR exhibitors, alas, that seem to not think this way. And I know there is a sort of a collective of various VR exhibitors who really do care. Electric Dreams as well being for sure as well, really, really noticing the importance of these factors.
Thank you. Thanks for going into detail on that. I think it sounds very important, and I'm glad to hear that that work's going on. If there's something about that on your website, do point us to that in the chat. I'm now going to come to Brendan to get another perspective on live events and virtual reality and this head-mounted Dismay. Brendan, do you want to introduce yourself and a bit on your perspective as COVID-19 hit your inventions? Just so you know, we'll just take you off mute.
Thank you. Yeah, COVID-19 has hit me hard, particularly the outdoor touring arts network. I have a history of making experimental interactive installations and rides, and quite often I stick things on people. So I've used a lot of monitoring techniques, neuro monitoring, worked with several medical ethics boards at universities to try and get unusual experiments through. And a lot of this, so I'm very aware of the, I suppose, a medical perspective on what constitutes duty of care towards participants or audience members, as we like to call them. What I'm currently making, and the thing that has been hit hard, is I've been touring the last 3 years virtual reality swings, which when you're on the swing and you're wearing a VR headset makes you feel that you're performing incredibly different movements than you actually are. And we've been touring that outdoor arts for 3 years. Last year I set up a new company, Studio Go-Go, to try and divorce what I do from working with universities and to create a business model out of it. And I have worked with theme parks, Alton Towers, Thorpe Park, as a ride designer previously, and very much aware of the fairground industry and the very tight margins that are required to sustain a location-based entertainment, which fairgrounds for hundreds of years have been exactly that. They survive on, you know, difference between £2 and £2.20 can be quite vast when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of riders. And so when I've now started to focus on the thing I'm sticking on people, VR headsets, I was already looking at the efficiency with which I could get a throughput of people, because I need to keep price point down, throughput high. Working with existing fairground rides, I don't want to impact on the general throughput of that. So there's already a very fine balance to how quickly I could get people on. And within that, there was a cleaning and decontamination regime of headsets. So very much looking to people like, you know, no different really to people like Holligate, the kind of procedures they were using and the kind of things that VR Cover were advocating. But now the game has changed, and you know, I'm currently working with a health and safety executive offshoot called ADIPS, who regulates the amusement ride industry. And not only do I need to prove that VR headsets aren't going to be lethal to life and limb as a ballistic projectile off a fairground ride, I've also got to prove that that I've taken reasonable steps to clean and decontaminate VR headsets for safe public use. And so it kind of comes down to two things for me. One is risk assessments. So what's the probability of somebody becoming infected with anything that may be transmissible? You know, COVID-19 isn't the only thing that nasty that lives can live in places, and then also the severity of what the consequences that might happen. And you know, there are ways to plan and mitigate both of those two. It is design, but not the glamorous end of design to design around that. But I've been looking at manufacturers of cleaning products, of materials that are already in use in hospitals, finding out a lot more about material science, ABS and PC blends that are used in headset manufacturers, vinyl coverings, all sorts of things. And, you know, when you get down to the level of, can you get COVID-19 hiding in stitching detail on the side of a vinyl cover? Read about it in hospitals. Yes, you can, but you have to use wet processes, soak things, dry things. It's essentially not rocket science, but it's really unglamorous. And there are ways to do this safely, but it is getting this balance right. It is a risk assessment that most people aren't used to conducting. But I'm confident I can produce and to work quickly, effectively, and safely. And it's just how quickly can I do it to make money? Is it economically viable? And I think already operating on slim margins, it's questionable. So coming back to Mark's point about it was just at a tipping point of where he was being able to see some returns to producers. That is what inspired me to form Studio GoGo. And I need to see whether it is still viable. But my opinion is I'm going to get out there, I'm going to test the water, because the other thing we need to deal with is public perception of risk. Even if you manage to mitigate actual risk, the public's perception of risk may be much higher. And so it's getting that balance right as well.
If I can just jump in, Brendan, if that's all right, because you're covering a lot and we want to make sure that we have time also for others' questions.
Yeah.
But it's great that so you're out there in the field and you're trying things out. You're entering a little bit of Ian's world doing a bit of research. Just everyone seems to be doing research. But Toya, I wondered if we could have a look to some of the questions that we have already that are going.
Sure. So we've got a question from Peter, and he said, Catherine talked about duty of care, offboarding, and he was thinking with the psychological and social impacts of COVID, and can it help to offboard us from this huge psychological disruption too?
I think that's a really great point and question. And in fact, I feel that there could well offboarding from COVID. I've never heard that term before. I'm assuming it's new. But having, I suppose, a project that we're working on at the moment seems particularly relevant to it. I haven't even talked about it in public yet, so this is the first time. Limina's doing a project with the NHS and a choir in Birmingham called Ex Cathedra, where we're creating experiences for people who are shielding, where they can sing out in nature. And we're also thinking of, like, in terms of target groups, this is for people at home, but people who are recovering from COVID as well, because singing can be really good. You know, we know it's great for breathing, the breathing exercises as well. So this may be a little off topic because we're talking about home entertainment, VR, but that is something directly that we're doing now, in production that's, not in location though, which is a shame. I wonder, I suppose I wonder if, Brendan, maybe if you've been thinking about this too.
Yeah, I think well, I've usually used discomfort and fear as part of the performance, but it's not, it's something that we play with in the amusement park industry, but this isn't the time and the place yet, is it, to be so it is about being sensitive to people's anxieties. I mean, genuine anxieties. I mean, it's like some people say to me, can you cure people of anxieties by using roller coasters? And I think actually it's quite difficult. And I think it's, it's a very sensitive, territory to tread. And I haven't got there yet. I'm looking forward to meeting the public and to see what their response is. But I'm also very nervous myself about being out there and doing this kind of work. So, yeah, I don't know.
Like VR is a mood machine. It can make you anxious, but you could also have a VR experience which makes you incredibly calm and soothed. So it really depends what the content is, doesn't it? And it's called Lost in Song, the experience that we're making with the NHS is all about being healed and soothed. But if you're creating something, I suppose, like Brendan, your work, which is pushing people about their comfort zone, that's the point of it, and that's the fun of it. Yeah, there's something in that, isn't there, which is people will be maybe our audience members, when you think of them as a whole, psychologically, the nation is going to be in more of a fragile state. So maybe we all need to bear that in mind as creators of immersive experiences and exhibitors, if you're researchers in this space, that we will have a different audience base psychologically than what we did, say, at the end of 2019.
Yeah, so let's have some more questions. I can see there's quite a few coming through.
Yeah, so we've got an outrageously practical question from Verity. Do we know how long COVID-19 can survive on the types of materials used for VR headsets, for example, plastics, leather and foam? Is anyone up for sharing scientifically robust risk assessments?
Yes, I could pick up some of that. In some cases, yes, we know how long it can survive on some surfaces. The main focus has been around stainless steel plastic, where I think the figure is somewhere around about 72 hours. It's important to remember that SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, survives in droplets in liquid. So the key thing to consider is where things can remain moist or for periods of time. Once that dries out, then the virus rapidly degrades. As for other materials, foams, leather, I'm not sure those have been studied specifically. We know that, for instance, cardboard, which I know is used in some sort of portable VR headsets, is actually quite low. I've seen a figure somewhere about 9 hours, so a lot less than the other two materials. I don't know about leather. The other part of the question about sharing risk assessments, I do that. That's my day job at the minute, going through that, from getting people back to university, thinking about the students that are coming back, but also getting back into the lab to do the research. So I have risk assessments coming out of my ears. So get in touch if you want any.
And I would say it's a changing dynamic with COVID-19 and with any infectious disease, dependent on many factors. So do take what's said here not as guidance or advice, but as things to be thinking about. because the responsibility always has to lie with people that are creating things, and that we are outsourcing our risk to others, which is a great thing that our wonderful government have been doing very recently. But let's stick to get beyond politics and see some more questions.
Great. And another question. If an effective vaccine can be found and approved by Christmas, how long do we imagine it might take for the global rollout of that vaccine, such that curators and audiences might presume a safe level of public immunity?
Yeah, I can't answer that, but I can pick up some thinking around it and maybe push it back to others for comment. Let's face it, if vaccine's released and the first amount, let's say it's a few million, it's going to go to frontline workers first. It's going to go to the health workers. It's going to go to carers, into the care homes, where the perception is needed is that it's needed first. The idea that it's going to go out to everybody instantly is probably misguided, I think. So I'm not going to answer your question with a date, but clearly there's going to be a prioritisation around public health, isn't there, around stopping any or trying to what was the phrase that was used earlier in lockdown with flattening the curve? Was it flatten any future curves should there be a bump in the future?
And maybe on that point, because Catherine, you talked about acceptance of virtual reality, but there's also this challenge around acceptance of vaccines. So this idea of vaccine hesitancy. So where do you sit? Where does anyone sit in thinking about whether or not people are wanting to take the vaccine or not? Ian, you spoke about this challenge that not enough people are coming through and getting involved in clinical trials. Could you say a bit more about that?
In terms of whether or not people are going to be
well, I guess so in terms of this particular virus, I would imagine the level of vaccine acceptance needs to be high, because it when it does get to people, its spreadability is high, and it's kind of if you're working in the live events industry and there's lots of people, it spreads socially, people are chatting. What are the things that need to be thought about in terms of its how infectious it is?
Oh, okay, yeah.
And the responsibility around what if someone decides they're not going to take the vaccine, and perhaps some thinking around how would someone know about that? Are we going to have vaccine certification?
Yeah, there's been lots of talk around that, hasn't there? There's linked to that. There've been lots of talk about what was it, immunity passports and stuff like that. Don't go there. Not a good idea. We don't know how long immunity would last, even if you did catch it, for instance. Let alone if you got a vaccine. That's the elephant in the room here. Lots of studies at the minute are suggesting you take a vaccine and it may not actually last longer than 6 months. So, are you going to have a questionnaire of people saying, have you been vaccinated before you'll let them take a VR experience? It's a difficult question, isn't it? In terms of things to be thinking about catching it, though, and coming back to that last question slightly, one thing to consider here, I think the question was put right at the very start as well, that is there a 100% safe way of or to prove that everything's 100% safe, and and how long does SARS-CoV-2 survive on surfaces? Well, there are treatments that one can think about in the disinfecting surfaces. There's a lot more work on that now, and understanding different ways of treating different surfaces to kill the virus, but also reduce the viral load. And it's not necessarily about getting rid. There seems to be a good correlation between amount of viral load that one catches and the severity of disease. So actually just reducing the amount of virus on a surface may be very important in stopping any future health implications. Of course, there are studies also that suggest, and you'll be aware, the big problem around SARS-CoV-2 is the fact there are asymptomatic carriers, people that can have the virus, be sick with the virus, but not show any symptoms, and therefore be spreading it around. The viral load in those people seems to be similar to those that are exhibiting disease. So you're not necessarily going, well, as we know, the term is asymptomatic. You're not going to see them if they're sick. So asking questions about, do you have a lack of sense of smell smell or exhibiting any of the symptoms that are, seem to be changing at the minute, is going to be problematic. You're never going to know if someone has it necessarily, and that's the big problem. At that point, I'll pass over to the other people.
So sounds like there's lots to think about. I'm just aware of time, and I want to make sure we get everyone's questions. So I just wondered, for our VR designers and distributors, what are some of the things that you've been trying? There's a few questions here around sanitizing headsets, use of UV light, different types of headsets. Have you been doing any experiments with thinking about those factors?
At Limina, actually, we haven't been trying to plan to run another VR theatre. Well, until there's either it's come down so low, the case rate, that it feels safe, or that there's a vaccine. And I suppose I use myself as my risk tolerance as a sort of example of would I go and do my own VR theatre? And right now, honestly, no, I would not go to a Limina VR theatre if it was running. So we're not trying to find a way that it's possible. I know that may be a harsh thing, a hard truth, but it's when the margins, as Brendan was saying earlier, the margins are so tight, and it doesn't take much to tip it to make it loss making. And so if you've got this, from an audience perspective, they've only got so much risk tolerance, that they risk budget that they can probably are willing to take. How much risk within a week, for instance? Where are you going to spend that risk on? Would you go and try VR maybe for the first time, something weird anyway, so kind of risk on risk? Or would you say, go and see your grandma or your friend who you haven't seen for 6 months? So I feel that audience demand is not going to be that high for a while. So that's why we haven't tried. What we have been doing though is sending headsets out to people, and we're exploring this as something we could do as a distribution model for Lost in Song, where it's like a postal service. So people will receive it with a kit, cleaning kit, lens wipes, etc., and then a video showing them how to get going with headsets and get the content up. So a kind of VR theatre in your home approach. But I guess I wouldn't want to put people off doing VR theatres. I guess it depends on the context. If you're doing it as you want to run a VR cinema and it's subsidised, so it doesn't matter if you only get, say, 40% capacity, then maybe it's okay, maybe it's fine, to go ahead and do it. It's just the Limina model is pretty self-sustaining. Ticket sales fund the show, and we didn't take, in total, we had about only £6,000 direct public subsidy of the whole since 2017. We were very little subsidy, which meant that we had to get those audience numbers, and if we didn't, then we were really stuck.
And before we go to Brendan, it might be worth saying, if anyone hasn't seen it, there's a really great documentary, Surviving the Virus, where you see two twins, medical doctors, one who returns to the field into medicine and covers it on TV, and his brother, who's also a medic, catches the virus and exhibits symptoms. Watching that documentary reminded me kind of just almost what a bit of a lottery it is, depending on your kind of health status and your vulnerability. It affects many different people in very different ways, and hopefully people are aware of that. So it'd be good to hear a bit about people's audiences. But Brendan, what's your take on thinking about vaccine acceptance and how that affects how you're proceeding with things?
That's interesting, the vaccine acceptance. I hadn't really thought. I mean, I'm still treating, because I'm still considering the headsets to be potential points of contamination, as Ian was saying, because of asymptomatic cases or people who haven't taken the vaccine. I think whatever cleaning and decontamination procedures I put in place now will probably persist now for all my operations, which is why I'm quite keen to get it right. So in a sense, it would be great for public health if the vaccine comes up and people, as many people as possible, take it. Brilliant. But I have to proceed just with It's a New World, with new decontamination and cleaning procedures. But the kind of people, it's interesting to hear Catherine talk about her audience, and it's a very similar audience to those who might come to outdoor arts events. But currently my business model is moving, because I'm situating myself as a second gate experience within theme parks, fairgrounds, amusement parks. Audiences are already starting to come back, and ever since August, I can't remember the date. Sorry, it was in July when the parks opened. Audiences have started going back, and we know that people between the ages of 16 and 25 have got the lowest perception of risk, or rather the highest risk acceptance, and they were the audience I was hoping to target to start with. And so I'm in an unusual position where the audiences are there, and if they're already willing to go into these public spaces to try new and unusual experiences, because that's why people go to amusement parks, then they are very likely to want to try the very latest thing, which will be a VR headset on an old-fashioned fairground ride. So that actually puts me in an unusual position where I have to be even more careful, because I think my audience are going to be, their perception of risk may be so low that they may be willing to put themselves in danger, because that is just the demographic that I'm attracting. So this makes me uncomfortable, but also it is, again, it's a fine balance. So again, I'm waiting to see whether that translates into reality once I get into the park and start operating. But it's certainly not going to be at the cost of doing things so fast that that we're willing to put anybody at risk, no matter how big the queue gets.
So essentially, then you're talking about putting yourself on the front line in a sense, or the people that you're working with. To kind of go back to Ian's point around who's on the front line, it's worth bearing that in mind. I did want to just double check on our questions. So there's one about looking at other sectors which are related. So has anyone heard of this ENT app that Jamie Hendry's developing with Proba, the creators of a health pass app? So trying to bring people back into West End theatres. So other sectors that are dealing with this. Are people aware of this safety in theatres? I also know there's Brian Lobo, who's a performer, who's working with, I think, with epidemiologists and thinking about this same question: when's it safe to go back into the theatre? So maybe there's some lessons for other people. I wondered if there were examples around this rental idea and going out to those audiences who wouldn't necessarily, are you flipping your business models to think about those who are probably most likely going to be very effective and at risk of catching COVID-19, so those vulnerability for disabled people, Black, Asian, minority ethnic perspectives, at high risk of death and catching it. And your asymptomatics, your young people, Brendan, who probably want to have a lot of social time together and are not thinking about the fact that they are probably the ones who are spreading it, and we've got no idea whether they're carriers. So I just wondered, in thinking about the inequities perhaps of the VR experiences and COVID, how's that having you think differently about your business models or your audiences or the content that you might create? Is it having kind of an impact on content creation?
Well, it is. VR already has a problem with inclusivity. It's so weighted towards the average VR user is a young white man, kind of reflective of generally technology early adopters. So if you picture, for instance, a queue outside the Apple store, people buying the new iPhone, it tends to reflect that. Not talking about in location, just about VR as a whole. And we desperately needed and have been, there's been a real sense of urgency, I think, within the sector before this to expand audiences, to make VR more inclusive, often via creative and artistic content, appealing to people who would not consider themselves early adopters. So our audience, for instance, at Limina, our median audience member is a woman in her 30s, but our most eager of audience members, people who are most likely to come back, are women over 55, and they're the ones who are also most likely to click through on our adverts. So we were super proud, that we were helping VR cross this sort of notoriously hard to cross chasm on the technology adoption curve. The problem is now, where is that gateway going to be? Because as was just pointed out, for instance, by Brendan, if the audience who are most likely to feel comfortable going back to VR, say an VR attraction, VR ride, arts VR experience, if they're going to be for young. That also reflects the same problem that we've already got with people who are already doing VR a lot. And then also, if something we haven't mentioned is the discontinuation of the Oculus Go, which was Oculus's gateway device. So we've got these gateways, in location VR being a fantastic gateway into the new medium. And then if you wanted to buy a headset, it also, you could buy an Oculus Go and it being just over £100. Now those gateways are not there at the moment. And so, or at least they are there maybe, but much more exclusive. So I just feel that we need to, as a sector, come together and think, how are we going to solve, where are we going to get these new audiences? Or are we just going to keep preaching to the converted? But I feel like if we don't, I don't know what the answer is, to be honest, but I know it's a challenge that we have to solve coming out of the pandemic. Otherwise we do risk maybe VR not taking off this time, you know, maybe it'll remain niche for another decade or so, and we'll have to have another go on another innovation cycle, you know, in maybe the 2040s or something.
So the dismay is still there. There's a few questions around the sanitizing of headsets. But there's something also specific about how you catch the virus. So it's through your eyes, through your nose, breathing in, and obviously it's passed on in those ways. So it's carried in the human body, on our fingers. So anything we touch, anything, you know, the challenge is eating out. I don't know if anyone's tried that. Eating out is a big challenge. And then there was a question about sweat and tears. If you have the virus, Ian, is it in your sweat and your tears?
Okay, yeah, I've answered one by typing in the box, actually, one question related to this. The conjunctivitis is actually a reasonably common symptom of moderate COVID-19, so it seems to be that it is in the tears. I think one study found it in around about 35–40% of people that they studied. Of course, the key thing is it's certainly a place where you can catch the virus, right? I think that's probably more important in the context of this conversation. You catch it by getting enough of the virus into your mouth, lungs, eyes, you know, and so face coverings obviously are important because, you know, you're stopping that aerosol transmission and catching those liquid droplets. Of course, I answered it to say in the box, you probably need a good fitting face mask because you don't want the droplets going upwards into the mask, I assume. You know, if you've seen all those pictures of looking at how masks actually work in catching it. I'm not sure about sweat necessarily, but that's probably less important anyway, rather than say in the eyes and the tears. I haven't seen any studies suggest it's in sweat.
There is a lot of cleaning those VR headsets. Sweat it's more common that they're sweaty than not. What I mean more in terms of, you know, you're going to catch it into your eye. So whether or not it's in sweat, I just don't know.
So another question then, there's a few questions in there that perhaps people could be answering if they can see them, and or do get in touch with our panelists if there's a kind of business to business exchange around how to do these things. So there was a question around sending off headsets, cleaning them and getting them back. Catherine, are you taking those headsets back? Maybe a quick answer given we've got 9 minutes left.
Yes, this is in the testing we've done with the team so far. Yes, clean them. I've left them for like 10 days in between just to be super certain, and send them out with cleaning wipes as well. So it's got multiple points. Everyone's told to clean it before and after. We clean it when it comes back, and also it's sat for 10 days anyway in between.
There's also a question about is it spread largely through social contact rather than on surfaces?
Yeah, there's been a study to that effect that suggests that it comes down to that viral load idea again. You know, if you're in contact with, it's also about how long you're in contact for, right, as well as whether or not someone's infected and the way in which it's transmitted. Early in the lockdown, they were talking about having to be around for something like 5 minutes or 15 minutes in order to catch it, of course. So yeah, the study seems to suggest that, you know, remember, it's also about, you know, you've got to think about the mode of actually catching it. And that was my point of the earlier answer, that you've got to touch a surface or touch something, and then it's got to get back into with insufficient numbers to infect you, right? And that's again the mouth, the nose, the eyes. So in order to do that off of the surface and back again is less likely than, say, being in front of somebody sneezing at you.
Thanks, Ian. And I did want to go to this question that Mark had at the beginning, which is about events in other countries. So Mark was talking about going back to Australia. So this is one of the challenges around people coming in and out of the countries. This is a globally spread transmitted disease. How are you thinking about that in terms of doing, would you go to somewhere in another country? How are you building that into your business plans, or is it out of the question? How are you thinking about touring your work, Brendan? Would you travel to another country to put this on?
I had already been considering Germany and Italy. They've got good, and even China as well, before this kicked off, as having healthy fairground industries. But as with most things, starting local, learning and expanding from there is always a model I would do anyway. So I think give another year, we'll know an awful lot more. But I am considering touring with this. But right now, start small, learn, and then see if we can scale up. That's the approach.
And Catherine you said you're not putting anything on at the moment. You're sticking to this home-based model. We should remember that there've been 18.8 million confirmed cases worldwide. 11.3 million people have recovered. 700,000 and above have died. That's a lot of deaths. There are communities who've been devastated by this. Regardless of what goes in our industry, I know it's affected our businesses, it's affected freelancers, it's affected artists, it's affected people that weren't working. It's affected so many areas of our lives. Domestic violence has gone up. People are losing their jobs. There's a lot going on, and we've covered a lot. So one of the things I wanted to introduce to this is to take us right back to when the moment happened that COVID went under lockdown. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and I was concerned and worried, some of the people that I work with and was in contact with who aren't online at all, and we speak on the phone. And so all props to Mark for this. He commissioned, when he invited me to this panel, a guy called Emmanuel Bajiji, who's a theatre and performance artist, to write a poem. And so he wrote a poem. He couldn't join us online, but he wrote a poem as a poet, and that allowed him to not have to go back into 0-hour contract work in a hospital and avoid being at risk of COVID. So I did want to read that poem to you to kind of remind us a little bit of the world that we're in. And it is challenging times, but as my mum always says, if you've got food on the table, you've got a roof over your head, we're probably okay. So this is Emmanuel's poem, The Why. And he rang me up and read this poem up. I've not heard from him for a month. And he said, Erinma, the why. Sometimes it rains, breaks the bank, there's a flood, and you're drowning in sadness, submerged. Sometimes the sun shines, reviving, igniting the spark with a powerful surge. Sometimes there's numbness, a blizzard of nothing, a vast cold blanket of grey. So what pushes you through? There must be a reason for living another day. I was so excited to hear that poem. I think it's really important that we have the arts. The arts is going to be a critical part of getting us back into learning how to be together. I just wanted to give a kind of final thoughts from our panel and double check that we haven't got any questions that have gone unanswered. So final thoughts, kind of a 30-secondy, because we've got another panel, to each of our panelists. So Ian, you first.
Put me on the spot. Look, you know, we're always going to be making pragmatic decisions moving forward. I know in my day job, thinking about, you know, getting my students back, for instance, into environments where, you know, we're worried about transmission, small lecture theatres, so on and so forth. You know, it's constantly in our thoughts. But at the same time, there is an opportunity here as well, in thinking about how we can build on what we've already achieved in this space and VR and so on and so forth, and how we put out information. I think there's an opportunity here to really enthuse people, to encourage people to get back out there when it is safe to do so, and really, you know, learn from the experience. There are opportunities here in COVID-19 just as much as there are
Thank you,
problems.
Ian. Thank you. And a bit quicker from our last two panelists. So, Catherine, last thoughts. You're on mute.
As creators and exhibitors, we have to create gateway experiences in order for the sector to continue to not just grow, but to exist, I think, for especially the creative and cultural side. And the gateway that we previously had that was doing really well, beyond expectation, was location-based. With that now having a challenging time, and with the Oculus Go being discontinued, I think we need to get our heads together. Every opportunity we can to create those gateway experiences, we need to grasp that opportunity, because, as you know, VR is a wonderful new medium that we have on our hands as humans, and we should be making the most of it.
Thank you. Brendan?
Mine's one of accessibility. I mean, I am concentrating on trying to get something out in a business context that I have been for a while, but we shouldn't forget when we emerge from this, how we've all experienced issues to do with accessibility. And I think we can all take that as a learning to understand people who do have access issues going forward. So always consider this new audience, because we've now all been there. So I hope we all learn from this.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you to our Electric Dreams. Mark, I hope your questions have been answered. I understand there's going to be up close and personal events where people can creators can discuss their work on Sunday, that starts with a missing room. Back to you, Toya, and thank you everyone for your participation and interest.
Thank you, Erinma.
Thanks, Erinma. Bye.